Hello, I'm Nancy Smith Mattox on WYTV7 Christian Broadcasters Network, and I have a radio show called Shine Your Light Radio Ministry. I'm so excited to be here. I'm excited to talk to you. Wanted to let you know that WYTV7 and Shine Your Light is a talk forum. We have real people, real life, real speakers that are talking about real events of the local time. We are a top rated radio station and a top rated radio show. So I'm really excited about that. What we are not is a reality show or an entertainment show. We have a mission of hope that we share with everyone around the world. So if you're interested in being interviewed on Shine Your Light Radio Ministry on WYTV7, please contact me. And thank you so much for joining in and enjoy the broadcast. Hello, I'm Nancy Smith Mattox on Shine Your Light Radio Ministry. I'm so excited. We have an exciting interview coming up. We have a gentleman named Michael Selch from North Salem, Indiana. But before we go forward, I'd just like to say that we are WYTV7 Christian Broadcasters Network. We are a nonprofit, and we do take donations. And what we use our donations for is to promote our broadcasters' radio and videos. We use those to promote those all over the world. We have international viewers, so it's real exciting, and a $5 donation goes a long way to promote that. So without further ado, let's get started on our interview. This is Shine Your Light Radio Ministry on WYTV7. My guest today is Michael Selch from North Salem, Indiana. He has a very interesting story, and I'm going to get started real fast. So, Mr. Mike, how are you today?
I'm fine today. I'm trying to stay warm in Indiana.
It's cold there. It's cold all over the United States, but it's especially cold in Indiana. Anyway, tell us a little bit about your testimony, Mike.
Well, where do you want me to start? BC or AD or what?
Let's start AD and just tell us a little bit about your testimony. I know we're going to talk about you've had 2 books. We're going to talk about those 2 in detail, but just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you came from and where you're going.
Well, I grew up on a dairy farm the first 12 years of my life, milking about 24 head of dairy cow AM and rain, snow, sun, holidays, whatever, it had to be done. So I guess at an early age, the Lord put me in a situation where responsibility, and one of the things I learned by that was satisfaction of getting the job done, and that's followed me all through my life. My major event of turning was in April of 1976 at 33 years old with 3 children under 15 in our house, and I suffered a massive coronary that the doctor said I shouldn't have lived through the night. And that was quite an experience for me to have a doctor. And I had never been in the hospital before. I had never had a broken bone. I'd only wore a cast one time, and that was a torn cartilage in a knee playing baseball in high school. But my life had been very busy, and I always found satisfaction in working and getting things done. I started driving a farm tractor when I was 5.5 years old. And I've just enjoyed working, and I'm glad about that. Now at 76, looking back, I've really enjoyed what the Lord's done in my life because of that. But that major turning point in April of 1976 knocked me flat on my back, and we had like $15 in the bank and 3 kids to raise, and it was just devastating.
Wow. Well, It sounds like, well, you're from the middle of the country, the middle of the United States, and
Yes,
it sounds like you're just salt of the earth. You learned how to milk cows at a very early age on a dairy farm, but that is devastating. That's devastating to you. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, what happened in April of 76. You just had a massive heart attack. And
well,
on your back.
If I had known it was a heart attack, it would have probably scared me to death. I was out in my workshop checking the air pressure on a tire on my Cub Cadet garden tractor, yard tractor, and it felt like something fell and hit me right between my shoulder blades. In fact, I actually turned to see what fell because it just hit with a thud and almost took the breath out of me. And I almost passed out. And I realized it wasn't something that fell. So I thought, you know, I'd had some back trouble because I always overextended things body-wise. So I thought maybe I'd thrown my back out. And my wife was gone. We had a niece and a nephew with us at the time spending the night. And my wife was gone taking a friend to the doctor when this happened. So the only position I could get in that was comfortable was sitting in a chair, bent over with my hands clasped underneath my legs. And that took the pain away some, but I couldn't breathe. So I could do that a limited time, and I let my hands loose and breathe, and the pain had come back, and I clasped my hands again. I did that for about an hour and a half before she arrived back home.
Ow.
And when she got home, she saw me gray and sweating and in pain. So naturally, I got in the car, and she took me to the doctor, and he took one look at me and sent me to the hospital. And the Lord is in all the details in our life. You know, as I look back, there were so many things that fell into place. Our oldest daughter was in band at high school, and as we came by the high school, headed towards the hospital, the band was loading up for a band trip. My wife swung in the parking lot, and our daughter was just coming out the door going to the bus, saw the car and ran over and found out what was going on. And she, of course, got permission to go with us, and she watched the niece and nephew while my wife took me on to the hospital. And that was an experience I had never had before. When I was a little younger, one of the shows on television was Ben Casey, Dr. Ben Casey. And that show started out with a camera mounted on a gurney rolling down a hospital hallway, and all you saw was the lights and the ceiling tile going by. And I experienced that firsthand. But when I got to the end of the trip, it wasn't Dr. Ben Casey, and there wasn't anybody with a smile looking up at me. It was a big sign up over the doorway that said intensive care coronary unit. Wow. And that was my first indication that I was in serious trouble. I had so much pain when I got to the hospital, they gave me 4 nitroglycerin tablets, and it did nothing. It basically went popcorn. And I had trouble hearing because the pain was so intense. And a nurse came at me, got into intensive care. A nurse came at me and had a syringe full of almost colorless liquid, and she looked at me and inserted it into the IV and said good night, and I didn't see her finish the job.
Wow.
It was that quick, and it was fuzzy time like the soap operas for quite a while after that. Of course, I lost track of time and all that, but the next thing was a doctor leaning over me very close to my face, and he was almost shouting at me that you young men like you rarely make it to the hospital, and you shouldn't even have lived through the night.
Wow.
And then the test results started coming back because Hendricks County Hospital at that time had just got connected with Cranert Institute of Cardiology in Indianapolis. And they were connected by phone. I didn't know that, but they were feeding my heart tests to Cranert at the time. And one of those doctors that leaned over me told me that. Later I found out was a cardiologist at Cranert, but I found out that one of my blood tests was supposed to be, blood counts was supposed to be 135 to 170, and mine was 3,163. And they tested it 3 times because it was so abnormally high. And at that time, I was the 5th one at Cranert Institute records to live with a blood count that high. They told me I'd be in the hospital at least 2 weeks and wouldn't be able to work for a good year. And time the Lord got done with things, I was out of the hospital in 9 days. I was 6 months recovering and weak as a cat, and they sent me home with some of the weirdest medication. I was on 3 pills, Valium, Librium, and Inderol. And I told the doctor, I said, Inderol sounded like a suicide medicine. It was a big deal at that time because I was allowed to walk 50 feet a day. And that was enough to go to the bathroom about twice. And the rest of the time I was almost helpless. I had trouble sleeping. And yet you're kind of numb and out of it. So that was devastating to an ego like mine, because I grew up in the Fonzie era, and big boys don't cry and all that. And
Yes.
Biggest blessing of my life at that time was my wife, because we had met in junior high and married young and had children, and that became the weight to supply the children. And that's when the Lord started tearing down barriers of being able to receive, because I had always earned everything I made. I earned everything on the farm, earned praise from folks, and all the things that I did. People bragged about how strong you are and all that, and that was big for macho ego. But when you get in a position where you're laying flat on your back and you can't walk more than 50 feet a day, it was devastating. But
Wow.
I had to learn more about receiving, and the Lord kept pumping things. Surprises kept happening. We had people would go to the bank and make a deposit and leave instructions, don't tell them who did it. Our insurance was paid by somebody we didn't know. A pastor came to us with an envelope full of cash money, and he said a farmer decided to sell his grain, and he usually loses 10% to spoilage. And he prayed, him and his wife prayed and said, we believe if we give money to you instead of the spoilage, it won't cost us anything, and we'll bless you. And about 3 months later, I saw him on the street. He came at me grinning and said, "You didn't cost me a dime." We had no spoilage, never had that happen before. So things like that happened all the way along, that walk.
Wow. Oh, goodness. Well,
Yeah,
you know what? You really are a real life walking miracle. And that kind of leads us into your book. I want to hear a little bit more about your story and the other things that have happened to you since you were 33 years old. But I just think that's really an interesting way that you put it, going from a very masculine, very macho man to flat on your back, and you learned that you had to receive help, and God taught you that. I haven't quite heard it put that way before.
Well, it was the way it affected me, because all of my years growing up from farm life, I've always been interested in how things work and what makes things work. And then the next step beyond that is making them work when I want to. And the next step beyond that is changing things to make them work the way I want them to. And that started both on the farm when you're by yourself and have to get a job done and you don't have help around. You have to figure a way of doing it. And you learn, rules of leverage and ways of doing things and times to do things. That's always been interesting. And long about that time, I got into IBM, punch card accounting, when they had the little paper cards or cardboard cards that had the rectangle holes punched in them. I got interested in how those things worked. And I took a correspondence course in that and got a job at an insurance company doing punch card accounting. And I did that for about 5 years. And then a job opened up with Firestone Racing Division, and I took that and ended up being on the road and a service manager, and traveled all over the United States and a few places around the world servicing races for IndyCar.
Wow.
And, that fit into after the heart attack, because I had a list of thou shalt nots about 3 feet long. And the ones I agreed with was don't run a vacuum cleaner and don't sweep a floor, don't use your arms too much, that kind of thing. But my first job had to be something that was non-labor, and it had to be something you could do without a lot of physical exertion. So I went to, ended up working at Andretti Firestone High Performance Center in Speedway, because I had a reputation with them and worked with them in racing for 9.5 years. And that put me on the road to being able to make income and be able to take care of things and catch up on bills and mortgage and that kind of thing. So all through that, God supplied our needs. It was just not exactly the way I was used to and not the way I really wanted, but I had to accept.
Yes, very much so.
The end result was I lost about 1/3 of the capacity of my heart to pump.
Oh, okay.
And about 3 years ago, I started having a condition of the right side of my face going numb. And of course, I went to the doctor and they put me in the hospital and ran tests for 3 days and never did find out what the cause was, and finally sent me home and said, "We know what's happening. We know when it's happening. We don't know why. So we're going to send you home." And a cardiologist from Hendricks County came to us. He'd been a cardiologist for 25 years, and he said, I looked up your record, and he said, I don't know of anybody that's lived more than 10 years. And that was a woman. He said, you're the only one on record to live at that time over 30 years with a heart condition like mine.
Good.
But you learn how to pace yourself. One of the things I learned, if you have heart trouble, you have to learn to live with it. And so the thing that happened in intensive care during that heart attack, I had been to church maybe a dozen times, had been to Sunday school a couple of times. Betty, my wife, took the kids to Sunday school, and she was always raised in the Methodist church. But, when it came that time, I just simply asked the Lord, I can't do it. If it's going to get done, you'll have to do it, Lord. And that's when a wonderful peace came in. And when that peace came in, a real strong desire to study and read the Bible came in. And it has remained with me these 42 years since that happened.
Wow.
I got ordained and been teaching Sunday school, which I, had no knowledge, no experience doing before that happened. It's been interesting.
It's very interesting. It's really just interesting to have a real live miracle right in front of us. I think the first book you put out, you co-authored with other people, and it's called I Believe in Miracles. Can you tell us a little bit about that book? That's how I found you, from Miss Jane Finch, who is the one that sponsored that book. And I'd just like to hear a little bit about your chapters. You've already told us what your miracle is, but how did that book fit into the scheme of things?
Well, that came in because my ordination college, Crossroads Bible College and Seminary, and the worldwide prayer minister for that is a man in Spain, and we communicated back and forth by email quite a bit, and we sent pictures back and forth and had a good relationship. And he sent me an email and said there was a lady in Australia, Jane Finch, that wanted to do a book about miracles, and she was collecting stories. Would it be all right if I sent her your email? So it's fine with me. So that's made the connection with Jane Finch. And then her requirements were 2,000 words of your testimony, which is difficult for me to put in that few words. But I did it. And that's this book right here, Do You Believe in Miracles, by Jane Finch. And that's where this came about, and you came in.
Okay. And so in that book, you had to limit that to your testimony and your miracle to 2,000 words. And
I think there's 8 stories in here. The first one is her son's story, and the second one is a story about me.
Wow. Well, that's an interesting book. I know I've read it, and I appreciate you for holding that up for us. Now tell us a little bit about your book, Finding Peace About Death.
It's a little book on Kindle. That's a picture of our local cemetery. I have found a lot of people that are very carrying a lot of misunderstandings about death and what it's about, and tried to approach it and what happened to me and what my experience was. And that when I asked the Lord in, the best way I can explain how the peace came in was working at the Indianapolis 500. You start at 7 o'clock the day before the race, and you work through that day, and in the night you're on guard duty, and then during the race you have all the people coming in and the band's playing, and then the race. And by the time the race is over, you've been in noise for so long, it's just roaring inside you. And when I asked the Lord in, it was just like when they dropped the checkered flag at Indianapolis and you have a dead silence. It's an overwhelming peace. And that's what I experienced in the hospital room when I asked the Lord in. And then that desire to read the Bible came with it. And it's been that way since. And that's really my judge of whether I'm doing something right or wrong. If my peace starts getting disturbed inside me, I have reverse gear pretty quick.
Well, I think all of us probably experience that inner turmoil, but we're not really sure how to bring the peace in. And if we would just listen to people like you and probably read your book, Finding Peace About Death, we'd know that if we ask God to join us, there will be peace. inner peace. And you say you can actually feel it when it comes to you, right?
Oh, yes. I live with it daily. And
Wow.
I have that witness inside if something is going wrong. I have that witness when somebody comes up and is telling you something that's not true. My wife calls it her knower. That's way down inside. That's what happens.
Wow, that's really, really exciting. I know everyone really needs to hear this because I know we all go through that. We don't really, sometimes we don't really even know that we're unsettled, that we're churning inside. We just are so confused. We just don't know. We don't know what's happening. We're just like, how can we fix this? What can we do? And if we'd all just get to where we could back off and get somewhere quiet and ask our Lord to bring us peace, it will happen. So that's very interesting.
But until
So,
that happened to me, I wasn't willing to listen.
yeah, okay.
My search for the Bible, back in racing days, we were on our way to California and we had the 8-track tapes, and Johnny Cash had a song called Matthew 24 is Knocking at the Door. And I knew that Gideon's placed Bibles in the motels, and Firestone put us up at the pretty good motels. But when we got to our destination, one of the first things I did when I checked in was pull a drawer open at the nightstand and pull out one of those red Gideon Bibles and started looking for Matthew 24. And that was my first experience to find out that the Bible's not alphabetized. To try to find Matthew 24, for somebody in my condition, it took me probably 15 minutes. And I finally found it and started relating to that. And that was another thing, in automotive and racing and that thing, you're working with Cougars and Thunderbirds. In our racing, we were working with Eagles and several different animal named cars. And of course, you get into Romans chapter 1 and you read about all the four-footed beasts. I could relate to all those beasts that it was talking about, but I related to them in an automotive way. So then it started making a connection that I have something in common here with the Bible.
My goodness. That's very interesting. I've just never heard it put that way before. So what would you say your favorite Bible verse is? Do you know, like off the top of your head?
One of my favorite Bible verses, there's several of them now, but one of my favorite is Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 7 to 8. And it's the man is blessed that listens to the Lord, trusts in the Lord. He'll be like a tree planted by the water, sends its roots to the river. The roots go down deep. And that's one of the things that's been in my Christian life, is trying to help Christians get their roots deeper. Everybody wants to solve their problems on top, back and forth real quick. They want an easy way out, but you have to have the tap roots and the roots going down to the good water in order to get and survive the storms of life.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that with us. So are there more books in your future?
Well, I want to redo Finding Peace about death. I want to expand that a little bit, and I'm still working on the book I told you about, the Ephesians, a handbook to Ephesians. And I can make a big, long commentary out of it, but I've gone through with my first draft of it and put references to some of my favorite commentaries and how it applied to my life as I went through. And I need to go through and do a second editing of that, and then I'll be putting that up. And I just put Finding Peace up on Kindle. I'd like to put it up on the printed version also, but I want to expand it and edit it some and shine it up a little bit.
Well, I think that's absolutely great. We're almost out of time, and I thank you so much for sharing with us today. But do you have a couple of takeaways that you'd like to leave with us, Mike?
Stay humble, and I always want to learn. I desire to learn something every day. And I've gotten into daily Bible plan right now. I'm into Oswald Chambers' daily Bible plan, and I like doing research on Bible versions. Right now my favorite version is the New Living Testament. But a lot of people misconstrue that with an update of the Living Bible, but the New Living Testament is really a great translation. And I go back to King James. If I'm preaching or teaching in a public forum, I use the King James because that's what most people are familiar with. But I like reading and studying out of the And I've got, I think my inventory right now is 25 Bibles in my home, and I've got 7 Bibles on the internet, on my computer from the internet. So I
Wow.
like to do the cross references and getting into the meanings of the words and so forth.
That's awesome. Do you pastor a church now?
No, I associate pastor with our local congregation, but
Okay.
it's we've got another pastor, and we just share back and forth. And I do funerals. I've done some weddings. I've done some baptisms, and I fill the pulpit wherever I can, whenever I can. My
So,
wife and I were into lay witness missions for quite a few years, which is where just lay people go into a church and testify and
mhm.
get people, mostly to get people within the church to share back and forth. That's another thing people don't do. They need to communicate with who they go to church with. You know, the Bible tells us about the fellowship of the saints. And a lot of people just go to church, spend the hour, and go home. You know, it's got to be deeper than that.
Yeah. Well, I like the church being on the outside talking to the people too. I don't necessarily think we only need to communicate with the people inside our church, any church. I think we need to be out in the streets too, because
Mm-hmm.
that's where a lot of the people
Definitely.
really need this, really need what we have.
Great commission.
Yes, sir. So, but I thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure. And just on behalf of WYTV7 and Shine Your Light, thank you so much, Mike Selch, for being with us today. And please don't forget that we are a nonprofit and we do accept donations. So thank you so much, and
Okay.
have a great day. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to WYTV7. Can you make us your #1 listen to network? Visit us on the web at WYTV7.org. Contact us. We are currently accepting guests to share their story of hope with our audience around the world.